Hello everybody. Today I'm going to be doing an oil change on my 2003 Nissan 350Z with the VQ35DE in it. This process is going to be similar to any VQ35DE powered vehicle such as a G35 or later year 350Zs. Doing an oil change is something I think most people are capable of. You just need to get some tools and pretty much learn your vehicle. It's something I highly recommend as it allows you to save time and money. And like I said, the tool investment is kind of worth it in the long run as you can learn how to do oil changes on other vehicles. That way you eliminate the need for scheduling shops and also finding a trustworthy shop, especially these days. So today I'm going to show you what tools are needed, how to do it, and we'll get right into it. All right, so the first thing I like to do is drive my car on these low profile ramps. This allows me to get enough clearance to slide a jack and jack stands under the vehicle while I'm doing the oil change. If your vehicle is stock, you might not need this, but my vehicle is on coilovers and lowered, so having these low profiled ramps definitely make it a lot easier to slide the jack under it. If you have a lift, that's even better, but if you're just using a normal jack and jack stands, I highly recommend getting some ramps. Just that step makes it a lot easier. Additionally, when you have it on the ramps, drive carefully. I would definitely recommend putting a wheel chock, which I do have on one of the rear wheels, and I have the e-brake on. And just make sure pretty much the car is secure on these, prevent any rolling. Do whatever you're comfortable with. Like I said, this video, I'll show you how to do everything pretty much, but you have to be careful. If you don't feel comfortable lifting up a car or sliding underneath it, safe and secure, I would highly recommend in that case, take it to a professional or have some friends, buddies. I mean, it doesn't hurt to check multiple times that the car is safely jacked up and secure before crawling underneath it. The last thing you want to do is lose your life over an oil change or working on vehicles. So definitely be very careful on how you jack the car up. This is pretty much for anything you do to a vehicle. Safety is like number one. So I would highly recommend, watch a couple videos, make sure you have the car secured properly, and that way you reduce the risk of any potential injury. So with the car jacked up, I have my jack and jack stands. So these are two tools that you're going to need to jack the vehicle up, along with the ramps I just talked about. This makes it just easier. If not, you can jack from either side. But on this vehicle, I like to use the ramps. That way I can use my jack to slide underneath a point in the bottom, which allows me to lift up the vehicle at the same time without having to go to either side. And then I just slide my jack stands underneath. I'll show you once I have the car in the air. Additionally, I like to let the car sit, especially if you've driven it around. I don't recommend getting hot oil all over you. So as you can see, car's cool to the touch. I let it sit for a while. Just let it cool down. Like I said, you don't want to be working on a super hot motor. The oil will be hot. You can burn yourself and it's never fun to do that. So I'm gonna get the car jacked up, show you guys where the jack points are and what I like to do when I do an oil change. And we'll get right to it. So now I have the jack placed under the center jacking point on this vehicle, which I'll show you right here. And I also have my jack stands on the pinch welds of the vehicle. Like I said, be very careful, learn your vehicle and see where the jack points are. Now that I have the car up in the air, the jack is the only thing holding it right now. The jack stands are in place, so I'm slowly going to lower the jack and allow the vehicle to rest on the jack stands. So now the vehicle is resting on the jack stands, and I'm going to pull the jack out of the way and get to doing the rest of the oil change. So now that the jack's out of the way, you can see that I have the vehicle secured on the jack stands. Don't mind that puddle, that's the air conditioning. And taking a brief look under the vehicle, you can see I have an aluminum undershroud. If your vehicle is stock, you'll have a plastic one. But just a little plug here, I would highly recommend, especially if your car is lowered, to get one of these aluminum trays. They're fairly cheap and they help you protect your oil pan and pretty much everything underneath the vehicle. Especially if you're low. I mean, you can take a rock to the oil pan and destroy a motor. And just in general, it's nice to have. Makes the bumper more sturdy and something to highly recommend. This particular oil pan or undershroud has a service panel with two 10mm bolts. So the first thing I'm gonna do is remove the service panel, which will give me access to the oil pan drain bolt, as well as the oil filter up top that you can see right there. So those are the two main things you're gonna be looking for down here. And up top on the vehicle, the only two things that pretty much are oil related are the oil cap up top, as well as the dipstick, and I have a ant running across my intake right now, so I'll get rid of that. But all you're gonna do is crack this loose. I like to leave it just sitting right here at an angle to help the oil flow better. And I also pop the dipstick out and just let it hang right there. This will allow for better airflow while you're draining the oil. Something I always just do with every vehicle. Not necessary 100%, but you know, I do it, and you can too. So now that I'm pretty much set up top, like I said, I'm gonna go back down to the bottom of the car and show you what to do from there. But before that, I'm gonna show you the tools and what I use for this particular vehicle. For starters, these are all the tools you need mechanically, pretty much, with the exception of an oil filter wrench. Now, I've done oil changes on this vehicle since I've owned it, so I know the oil filter's not too tight. They only need to be hand tight. However, if you've been taking the car to different service shops, or if you don't know, maybe you tightened it too much last time, you can use one of those belt wrenches or an oil filter wrench to remove the oil filter. However, you should be able to just manhandle it, grab it, and turn it to the left. They shouldn't be on too tight, but if they are, you definitely would like to get some type of oil filter wrench to make that easier. I have my ratchet along with a 10mm socket and a 14mm socket. The 10mm socket is going to be used to remove the bolts, those two bolts for the service panel, and the 14mm socket is going to be used for the oil drain plug. Now, the bolt sizes might vary depending on vehicle. They should be, I think, a 14, but if you have an aftermarket oil pan or an aftermarket bolt, they can range. As you can see, I like to use OEM Nissan filters. There's the part number for you. Some people use oversized filters, different brands and whatnot, but again, do your own research, make your own decisions. For me, I just use OEM. I've always done it. It's done well for me. And for oil, you're gonna need 5 quarts of whatever oil you wanna use. There's millions of debates from people, especially with these vehicles. Some people use 540, some people use 530, some people use 1050. I mean, people put some crazy stuff in this car. Me personally, I use 530, fully synthetic. The brand, pick your own brand. I use Valvoline. People have used Mobil 1. People recommend a ton of different things. I just stuck with Valvoline. I mean, I change the oil every 3,000 miles. So as long as it's full synthetic, you know, a reputable oil company, I think you'll be all right. The main thing is that you get fresh oil in these motors. So whatever you use is up to you. I wouldn't complicate it too much. Some people use additives. But in my case, this car has a lot of miles, and I've been getting by with this setup every 2,000 miles and haven't had any issues with the vehicle. So like I said, do what works best for you. The forums will tell you everything. People will have different opinions on everything. So just do your own research, make your own decisions on what type of oil and what oil filter you want to use. So I forgot to mention this in the last clip, but once you got the vehicle jacked up, you also definitely want to have a oil catch pan. So these pans you can pretty much pick up at any hardware store or auto parts store or Walmart. They're fairly cheap. Something I definitely recommend. You can even transport your old oil, which I'll get to once we're doing and finish the oil change. In these, or in this specific container, you can't just throw oil in the trash. I mean, people do it, but it's definitely not recommended. AutoZone or any auto parts store typically has a oil recycling program. So once you're done with your oil, you can clean it up, put it in this or into the old container that it came in, and bring it to your auto parts store, and they'll tell you to go to the back and dump it. And that way you can do it for free and recycle the oil like it's meant to be recycled. But I would definitely get one of these pans. Additionally, I have a creeper that will help me slide under the vehicle. This is not needed. You can just do it on your back, but I mean, it makes it easier. And again, this is something I just have laying around from all the previous jobs I do on vehicles. So highly recommend it, as well as the oil pan. Additionally, also need a funnel. If you don't have one, I would just get a cheap funnel, and that'll help you not spill oil all over your motor. I'm under the vehicle. like I'm showing you here, I have the service panel. I decided to throw on some rubber gloves. This will help with any mess. Also highly recommend gloves, you know, no one likes dirty hands. Makes cleanup a lot easier. So what I'm going to start by doing is removing these two 10mm bolts on the service tray, and that'll gain me access to the drain bolt as well as the oil filter. So yeah, I'm just going to slide underneath the car and break these bolts loose. So I removed the two bolts, as you can see. I like to slowly release this service tray because a lot of dirt and rocks build up on top of it. So you don't want to be directly under it. And when you remove it, just be careful of your eyes and getting any rocks or dirt and debris in your eyes. So I typically stay away from this and just slowly wiggle it out and place it to the side. Now I have access to the oil pan, the oil drain bolt, as well as the oil filter. And I'm going to crack those loose. Like I said, in my case, the bolt is a 14mm. So I'm going to slide my oil catch pan underneath and crack this bolt loose and go from there. So now that I have the bolt broken loose and the oil pan under the vehicle, I'm going to loosen the bolt while applying pressure to the bolt with my hand. And then quickly just, you know, when I see some oil dripping or know that I'm at the end of the threads, I'm gonna quickly just pull the bolt out and let the oil drain into the pan. So now I just have my oil draining, caught the bolt. I'm just gonna rest it right here while the rest of the oil drains. Now that most of the oil is just trickling, position my oil catch pan in a way that the oil filter up top can also drain while the rest of this oil is trickling. As you can see, the oil filter is located right up top. I'm gonna break it free and you'll see some oil drip out of it, and I'm gonna let it drip out until a point where I just pull it off and pretty much turn it over and leave it in the pan for it to drain. So I got a good grip on it, finally, through under here, and I'm just gonna loosen it until oil starts coming out. So as you can see, I like to just loosen it up a little bit, let the oil trickle for a little bit. And then I'm going to grab it and quickly turn it over into the pan, allowing for pretty much the rest of it to dump over. I use the same process as I use with the drain bolt, which is applying pressure while I loosen it until I feel the last of the threads. Then I'll simply slowly turn it and leave it in the pan to drain. While the oil is draining, I like to take my drain bolt and wipe it down, get all the oil off of it. And a very important step is to remove the crush washer and replace it. So these crush washers are very cheap, just 99-cent part. You can get them at the auto parts store or get a baggie online like I do. I have a whole bunch of them. And you definitely want to ensure that you replace this every time you do an oil change to prevent any leaks. Also ensure that when you're removing the bolt, that the crush washer comes with the bolt and you take it off. Sometimes it'll get stuck to the oil pan. And if it gets stuck to the oil pan, you definitely don't want that happening. So just remove it to prevent a leak or double gasket. And then pretty much replace the crush washer every time you do the oil change. Simple step. Keep your car from leaking all over the place. And cheap, often overlooked, but definitely do that. I also move on to the oil filter. Pop it open. Sometimes they have a plastic cap on. Take that. And for the oil filter, all I'm gonna do is use some oil and lubricate the O-ring. This will allow the oil filter to turn on and tighten onto the oil filter housing without binding or ripping, whatever. It's just a simple step. Keep it lubricated so that, again, O-ring doesn't bind up, causing more leaks. Also, when you remove your old oil filter, make sure similar to the drain bolt, that this ring doesn't get stuck on. I don't really see that happening, but if it does, that'll create a huge leak. So just lube this up. Some people pre-fill it. In my case, I don't, just given the location of the oil filter. It's sideways. If it was straight up and down, then I would probably fill it up a little bit. But like I said, I don't really pre-fill them. Oil usually gets to the motor, no problem. If you're that concerned, you can either pull the fuel pump fuse or hold the accelerator fully to the ground while you crank the motor for the first time, and that'll pretty much kill the fuel pump and allow oil pressure to build up into the filter. So you can do that step to ensure you don't have a dry start, but that's completely up to you. Back under the car, first thing I'm going to install is the oil filter. You can do the drain plug first. Oil filter doesn't really matter. Just ensure that all the oil is drained out, done dripping. I then take a rag and wipe down the mating surface to ensure there's no debris and there's a clean surface for the oil filter as well as the drain bolt to be reattached to. So once that's wiped off, I'm going to grab my oil filter. As you can see, I put some oil on the O-ring like I said, and I'm going to just toss it on and begin carefully tightening it. Be sure everything should be very easy to thread on. If you feel any binding or tightness, back out. You don't want to cross thread these. And like I said, I'm just gonna, hand tighten. It's pretty tight. Don't feel any visible gaps, and you should be good. Just make sure it's on there nice and snug, and you're good to go. So just gonna wipe off any of the excess. Now I'm going to grab my drain bolt with the crush washer and thread that on. Again, same thing, I like to tighten it by hand first. Make sure there's no binding. And then I'm going to grab my 14mm socket and tighten until the crush washer is snug and the bolt is snug. If you would like, you can get the torque spec and torque it on, but like I said, I've done this multiple times. I kind of have a good feel on how tight to make this. So now that everything's tightened up down here, I'm going to give it one more wipe down, and I do like to leave the service panel off until I fill the car with motor oil and start it. That way I can come back under, take a look, make sure nothing's dripping or leaking, and then my last step is pretty much putting the service panel back on. So now I'm going to go up top and fill the vehicle with oil. So moving back up top, you see I have the oil cap already removed. So I'm going to just place that to the side. And since I had this loosened, the oil dipstick, I'm going to just push it back in, make sure it's in place. And at this point, you want to fill with 5 quarts of oil. If your car has an oversized oil filter or oil cooler, then you would want to use more oil, but factory calls for 5 quarts. So I'm going to fill the car with 5 quarts. I would recommend a funnel. If you don't have a funnel, you can make one out of a water bottle or several other things. In this case, I have the oil in a container that has a spout, so I don't need a funnel, but gonna fill it up to 5 quarts, and then I'll check the dipstick. Like I said, I have my oil in this container. It's measured out to 5 quarts, and it has the spout, so I'm just gonna fill up with oil and go from there. Now I'm going to throw the oil cap back on and just take a peek underneath while the service panel's out and check for leaks. Once there's no leaks, which I doubt there are any, I'm going to put that service tray back on, drop the car, start it up and check for oil after about 5 minutes and see where it's at on the dipstick. So now I'm going to put my service tray back on with those 2 bolts. So it's going to slide this piece into the grooves and push up. I'm going to hand tighten these first and then just, snug them down. So those are all snugged up, no rattles, no leaks, and I'm pretty much done with everything down here. I'm going to jack the car up from the center point, remove the jack stands and lower it onto the ramps. In that case, the oil change is pretty much done. Now I have the car back on the ground on level service. Before I start the vehicle, I like to, again, ensure that I have no leaks, so I just take a peek underneath. And then I check the dipstick to ensure that I have sufficient oil. And then last step is to start it up. I like to let it idle for a little bit, turn it off, check again, make sure oil level is within the dipstick range. And after that, you're pretty much all done. So I'm just gonna go check the dipstick before I turn it on. These cars, if you own, you understand the frustration. It's a weird shaped dipstick, kind of hard to read. Just pull it out slowly and wipe it off. Then I like to put it back in, give it a couple seconds, pull it out again, just make sure it's within range. So as you can see, it is within range, so perfect. Now that's left is to make sure everything's tight. Close the hood, start it up, and you're completed with your oil change. So now that the car is pulled back into the garage without any ramps, it's now on a flat and even surface, and it was running for a couple minutes. I'm going to pull the dipstick out, get another reading, and just make sure it doesn't need to be topped off or anything. And that's pretty much it. As you can see, oil is in spec. It's a little hard to see on these dipsticks, VQ problems, but I have enough oil. So that pretty much wraps up the oil change. Now that the car's on the even surface, like I said, check for leaks, check the oil. Over the next couple of days after I do an oil change, I like to, peek at the oil, make sure the oil level is correct, make sure wherever I park doesn't have a giant puddle of oil underneath it. Haven't had any issues with that so far, but just keep an eye out on it. I recommend checking the oil regularly in these cars specifically because they do tend to burn oil. Like I said, mine's been pretty good, but it doesn't hurt in any vehicle to make sure you have proper oil. Keep an eye on the oil gauge, oil pressure gauge you have in these vehicles. And that's pretty much it. So I hope this video helped guide you in the right direction if you're doing an oil change and provided some value to you. Please like and comment. Let me know if there's any other videos you'd like to see on this car or any other cars I work on. This is my personal car and I've done a lot to it, so I can definitely do a full overview on the vehicle, as well as other vehicles I work on. So if you're interested in that, definitely be sure to drop a comment below. And thank you guys for watching, and drive safe.